Today we are going to graph inequalities. So our goal by the end of the video should be is to graph the set of solutions to an inequality. And all I mean by set of solutions is the possible values that x can be, or what numbers x can be. All right, so by the end of this video, we should be able to graph something like 2 is greater than or equal to x. All right. So let's take a look at our first example here. Actually, before we do that, let's find out some important signs and vocab for this. Okay, so there's 5 signs, one we're familiar with, which is the equal sign. And then 4 more, so we have less than or equal to, we also have just less than, greater than or equal to, and then greater than. Okay, so very important, we definitely need to know those. So let's take a look at what this means in kind of the context of a problem. So let's use each of those signs on the same graph. So the first one I'm going to start with is just x equals 2. And by graph, I mean we're going to draw it on a number line. I want to make sure my endpoint is on there. So 2 is my endpoint, and include a few numbers around 2. Okay, and so with x equals 2, x can only be one number, and I'm going to shade that in. That is 2. There we go. All right, next up, let's do x is less than or equal to 2. All right, I'm going to draw it on the same number line. Remember, we want to make sure to get our endpoint in there. Our endpoint is 2. All right, and this endpoint is going to be filled in because it's this line here tells us that x can be equal to 2. So I'm shading in 2 because x can be 2. What we're shading is all the possible values of x. So in this case, x can also be less than 2. So we're going to shade the numbers that are less than 2. So like we know 1 is less than 2, so I started shading to the left. But all of the numbers to the left of 2 on the number line are less than 2, so I want to make sure I go all the way over to the arrow. All right, similar to that is x is less than 2. I'm going to use the same number line. Okay, and this time I still need to include my endpoint of 2, but this is what we call an open circle, whereas the or equal to part was a closed circle. So this one has an open circle on 2, but because x cannot be 2, however, it can be all the numbers right up to it. So like I'm shading all the way up to the circle, but not including that. And I want to shade all the numbers that are less than 2. All right, next up we have x is greater than or equal to 2. So on the same number line, all right, this time it still can be equal to 2, so I am shading in 2. I also want to shade the numbers that are greater than 2, which in this case is to the right. So 3 is greater than 2, 4 is greater than 2, 4.7 is greater than 2. I'm shading all of these numbers to the right of 2. And lastly, we have x is greater than 2. So using the same number line again, my endpoint is still 2. So I'm going to put a circle on 2, but this time our inequality does not include or equal to, so I'm leaving it open. I want to shade the numbers that are greater than 2. So again, to the right, because 3, 4, and 5 are greater than 2. And so are all the numbers in between those, like 3.3, 4.21, 3 and 1/2, right? That's why we have to have this shaded line, is because we can't possibly write out all those numbers, so we shade them in to show them. All right, so there's an example of what all 5 of the inequality signs look like using the same number. We could do any number. Just be careful, in all of these, the variable is on the left. However, if you have the variable on the right, we could have the same thing. So, for example, this last one says x is greater than 2. That's the same as 2 is less than x. So this one says x is greater than 2. And this one says 2 is less than x. Right, and we can test that out by testing a point that you shaded. So like we shaded 3. So let's test it in both of those. 3 is greater than 2 is true. So I've shaded correctly. And then over here, 2 is less than x. So let's try 2 is less than 3. Well, that's also true. So I know that I've shaded correctly even for this one.